So we spent the summer driving up the coast with the kiddos and had a blast. And let's see, where were we? Washington? Or were we still in Oregon?
Oregon.
Still in Oregon?
Yeah.
Midway through Oregon, I guess. We got a check engine light, and I ran the codes, and it was a low power at ECM, which means that our computer in our bus did not have enough power. That was its only issue, and it was taking longer to start, cranking and cranking and cranking. But it would fire up and run great. So we finished out our trip, and we got here to my dad's in northern Idaho, and let it sit for about 2 weeks before the kids went home and we got all settled, and then I started to look into it. We were gonna take the bus to go grab some parts so that we could finish our bathroom, and it wouldn't start. Yay. So I started looking into it, and with the low power at ECM, we immediately looked at voltages and wires and such, which were not correct. So we tore all the wiring loom apart in the engine bay and went through all the wires, replaced a bunch of battery wires and ground wires and wires running between all kinds of stuff, and finally got our voltages up to where we needed them to be. The bus still didn't start. So at this point, we're like, well, wonderful. Wonderful, this is great. Then we started testing pressures. We had just... Nope, did I miss something? Feel free to jump in here.
Batteries.
Yes, along with the wiring and everything, we replaced the batteries and used 2 of our old solar batteries, because while we were in Seattle, or out across the bay from Seattle, we ruined our solar batteries because we didn't have any sun for a few days. So we had to replace those right after we got here.
We ruined them. We really didn't. We only ruined 2.
Yeah, we ruined half of them. The other 2 are still good, and now they're our bus batteries. So then we started looking at pressures. We had just, about a year ago at that time, we had the H-pop, the high pressure oil pump, changed, and new O-rings on the injectors done, along with IPR and ICP and all that good stuff. And so I didn't initially jump to there, and I didn't have the gauges to check what I needed to. So started checking pressures and realized that there was no oil pressure, not in the high-end pressure system, but in the low-end pressure as well. So there was no oil supply. So ordered a gauge so that I could check that correctly, to double check it. A friend sent their ServiceMax kit over so that we could do diagnostics on it correctly, not just pulling codes, but actually live monitoring the engine. And those all verified the same thing, that there was no oil pressure, not just on the top end, but on the bottom end. So then we had to pull that apart. We hoped that it was just the pickup tube and the oil pan. Pulled that first, and it looked okay. With the rear engine and our setup and how big the harmonic balancer is, or the dampener, whichever you want to call it, you have to pull the whole back end off pretty much to get all that apart to be able to get the pickup tube out, to like pressure test it, or really look at the gasket or anything. So then we dove into that. We took pictures each step so that we didn't forget anything. And so we figured while we were in there, we were going to replace everything while we were in there. So we got a water pump, we got an oil pump, the high pressure relief valve, which could have been sticking maybe a little bit, but wasn't our problem. And what else? Is that it? I think so. New gaskets and such. We were concerned with one of the bearings that was in there. And we were going to replace that, and then after talking to some professionals, decided against it. And so we replaced the oil pump, the water pump, just because we were already in there. It turns out the oil pump was bad. You're right, we didn't. I ordered the water pump.
I put it away.
It's around here somewhere. And it turns out that it doesn't fit. They told me the wrong cross-reference numbers, and it doesn't fit. But the old water pump was okay. It's easy enough to replace if we need to, so I went ahead and just put the old one back in. We did replace the oil pump, which was bad. By looking at it, you wouldn't believe that that would be your problem.
No, we're going to do something really cool with it.
we're gonna make art. So here's the gear part of it, and it moves around fairly freely, which I didn't know was a problem until we got the new one. But
It's not supposed to.
yeah, it's not supposed to. Like the new one, you can barely
Stiff.
move it. Yeah, super
Yeah.
stiff. So that was our problem there. Put it all back together. Order new injectors because I knew I had pressure tested the top end with some shop air, and it was definitely leaking. So the injector O-rings that we had just done a year
Wait.
ago were already bad. What?
Once you put it all back together, we tried to fire up the bus.
Went ahead and cranked it to make sure that we had low end oil pressure, which we did.
Yay!
Yay! Us. I'm not a diesel mechanic. I am now. Just DT 466s. That's it though. So I had pressure tested the top end earlier and realized that our injector O-rings, or there might be another problem in the fuel rail, was having an issue up top. So then I pulled that apart and pulled the old injectors out, and all the O-rings were either completely blown or had chips out of them or had issues, and they only had maybe 6,000 miles on them. So that sucked. But I had already ordered new injectors. I figured if I was going to be in there, I was just going to replace them. I wasn't going to do the O-rings again. I was just going to put new ones in. So I already had the new ones. I went to put them in. I actually did put them in because the body of everything looked the same, and then realized that they were different. And not only were they different, but they sent me 2 different numbers. So I left them in. I didn't want to fire it up and have any issues, and that was over the weekend, so I waited to call them. I called them, and they said, yeah, those are definitely the wrong injectors that we sent you. I'm so happy that you didn't fire it up, because that probably wouldn't have been a good thing. So now we waited a week to get the correct injectors. Now we have the right injectors. The whole motor's put back together. The new injectors are in it. They were tight to get in, but they're in. I'm not worried about the tightness. They were just nice and tight going in. Put everything back together. Not everything. The radiator and stuff still not on there. But computer, everything's back on. And we're going to test it here in just a few. We're waiting for Jonah to wake up or get a little more nap in because he's sleeping. And then we're going to see if she wants to start. And then if she does start, hopefully...
Then the real work.
Then the real work begins. I have to re-loom all the wiring because all of it's bare right now. I have to make sure that its pass-throughs and everything are nice and guarded so that we don't have any issues there. And we need to put the radiator, all the breather tubes, all the, coolant supply and return tubes back on it and get her ready to go because we have about 4 days until the snow starts to roll in. Maybe 5 days. After that, the snow will clear up, but it'll stay icy. So we're pretty much kind of stuck here unless we find a nice warm window where we can scoot out. So here's to hopefully
The bus starting.
the bus starting and running good. Not just starting, but being happy. There was
With
probably a
this-
few ways I could have cheated and got it started. Like filled the top case with oil so that it had pressure and then it might have started itself.
But we did
But
discover
it would have been a problem later, so I wanted to get it taken care of while we weren't on the road.
We did discover through the whole injector debacle, though, that it may have not had the correct injectors in it, which is why
Yes.
it blew over
So even the
after 6,000
even the
miles.
injectors that I pulled out, even though they look the same, they're not the right injectors for this motor. If you don't know, injectors on at least in international DTs, they run by build number, not just VIN number, not just year, not just model, not just what they were in, but the actual motor's build number. So we had a 98 to 99 DT466E that was a very early production of it. And because of that, they had certain parts on it that are not on the later ones. Parts that would fit but aren't exactly correct. So injectors go by horsepower, torque, oil supply, fuel supply. Like there's a bunch of different variables there. And if they're not right, the engine might run, but it might not run to its full potential. Being that these injectors went in tighter than the other ones were, and the body looks slightly different, even though the fit is technically the same. I have high hopes that now it's going to even run better now that it has the right stuff in it. So, fingers crossed. Cross your fingers that she runs and she's happy. Because she normally just purrs like a kitten. And I want that back. I want to just brum, and she fires right up, and we go about finishing the bus. We still haven't finished our bathroom. We still haven't finished our bulkheads. We didn't do our bulkheads before, which is the front and the back. That's what we call the bulkhead. I don't know if that's right. I really don't care. Headers, if it was a house. We haven't finished those because we were going to put mini splits in, and then we've decided against it since that. So now we need to finish those out. No, we don't want to be hot. We don't want to be anywhere that it's going to be hot. If it's hot, we need to leave.
Yeah.
Period. We got a wood stove so we can be cold places because we like winter, we like snowboarding, we like northern Idaho. And we like snow, all that fun stuff. So we're getting a wood stove. It's coming in. It's actually going to go right where you're sitting currently. But hot is not an interest. So I want to finish the bus. I want to quit working on it. Before we ever left on our initial trip, I know we had stopped vlogging and we weren't doing that whole thing, unfortunately. So we didn't capture much of that besides pictures and receipts. But we spent a lot of money on just fixing the bus before we left the first time. And then it broke down on the way up here and we spent some more money. And then when it got here, we had to replace the air compressor and we spent some more money. And that was the first trip. And then we got back to Arizona and we redid the front end suspension because she had a sweet little gangster lane. And we got that fixed and redid the whole front end, spent some more money on it. And then now we drove back up here and we're fixing all of these issues, spending more money on it instead of spending money building it. We should have been finished a long time ago. It sucks that we're not. Like when people are like, hey, can we see your bus? I'm like, yeah, for sure. And then I forget it's not done. And I'm like, oh, so this is what happened. And now the story just keeps getting longer. And so I want to be done.
And it sucks watching like friends of ours that started after or around the same time as us.
Seriously.
And they finished and they've been able to travel and live and like only having to replace like a tire.
Yeah, no offense to you other Skoolie folks and friends of ours, but the ones of you that bought a bus for like $500 or even $1,500 from auction or whatever and just got a steal on it and have never had to put a penny into it, seriously check your maintenance because you're going to end up screwed at some point. I expected all of this at some point. I expected to have to replace wiring, of course, it gets old. I expected to have to rebuild the motor at some point, which luckily we still haven't had to do. But I don't want to have to do it. But we bought the motor specifically because it's easier to rebuild, even if it's in the frame, so that's great. But I didn't expect all of these issues within the first year and a half, 2 years of having the bus. I expected to at least have it finished, and it's not. So here's to finishing the bus. Here's to the bus letting us start. Come on, you stupid brick.